There's a spirit that defines every Tasmanian. Fight, gravel rash grit, devil-like determination. It's time to unleash this spirit on the great game. Without our boots on hallowed grounds, the AFL will never be complete, nor will we.
Hello and welcome to The Believers, Tasmania's AFL journey, as we celebrate the great contribution of the icons and legends of Tasmanian football to the national game, and at a time when we pitch and get so close to achieving an historic 19th licence. My guest today, he needs no introduction. He is the Brisbane Lions coach. He's a member of the Tasmanian Football Hall of Fame. He is the one and only Chris Fagan. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Alistair. It's great to be here and to talk about Tassie footy. That's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Queenstown, your formative years spent in Queenstown up until you're 15 years old on the famed gravel oval at Queenstown. And your dad, Austin, was a West Coast footy legend. Is that where you got the coaching bug, going right back to seeing what your dad did in West Coast footy, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. As a young fellow, I used to go to training with Dad, walk around while he took training and coached his team. I learned a lot about football. I learned to swear at a young age as well, much to my mother's disappointment. But they were great times. You know, the local players were my heroes, and obviously Dad was, and he was a pretty good player on the West Coast. I think he was capable of playing at a much higher level, but just family and work kept him on the West Coast. But I was the beneficiary of that in terms of learning from him. He was one of those coaches that I think my memory was that he had great relationships with his players, and they would often come to our place for dinner. And I think I learned a lot of my habits from Dad, and I could tell even at that young age that he had that ability to get players to play for him. And I think that was the reason why, because he actually took time to get to know them and as individuals and sort of try to help them in their life. So it was really good upbringing for me.
So you'd go to all the games naturally, you'd be in the rooms as a little fella before games, that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely everything. Run out with the team as a mascot. Did all that. Dad was initially was coaching Gormanston, the Mountain Men, and then I think Lyle and Gormanston, towards the end of my time in Queenstown, amalgamated. The town was losing population and the competition had to shrink a little, and Dad was one of the leading administrators in bringing those two teams together. And I think my grade 10 year, I think we won the seniors and the reserves and the under-16s in the 1 year, the Lyle Gormanston team, and Dad was pivotal in all of that. So great memories from those days. I mean, Queenstown was a pretty tough town, but it was a really nice town too. The people there were friendly. As a young bloke, you couldn't ask for a better place if you loved your sport, because you could play cricket, football, basketball. You could do whatever you liked, and it was pretty easily accessible. You just get on your bike and ride to wherever the event was occurring. And it was a decent-sized town in those days, probably 8,000 to 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So, that was good competition, and even though we were quite remote, it was a really good place to grow up.
When you grow up there and your local footy ground's made of gravel, do you even think about that being abnormal?
Well, no, I didn't actually realise that you could play on turf until I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. When we went over to Rosebery to play a game of football, and they actually had turf over there, which I thought was great because you could dive and do all sorts of things on the grass without, taking the skin off your knees and your elbows. But no, pretty much it's funny, it's a pretty scary proposition playing on gravel, and it's hard. It wasn't fine sandy gravel. It was sort of had bits and pieces of rock in it, and underneath the sand bit in the middle was the concrete pitch that they used in the cricket season. So, it was tough, but that was what you were accustomed to. So you didn't think that there was a better surface to play on. It was quite interesting. I played on that until I was 15, then moved to Hobart, and I think maybe my second or third year in Hobart, I started to play senior footy down there, and I got picked in a TFL number 2 side to go around to Queenstown to play the WTFA on the gravel. I don't think I was good enough to actually make the second TFL team at that stage. I think they put me in because I was an ex-local, and I thought, I'll be right. I've played on this plenty of times, and all the other blokes will probably be a bit worried when they see it. Well, it was quite interesting. I got it, and I looked at it, and I thought, how the hell did I play on this? Because I'd had 2 years of getting soft on the turf, and I thought, oh, God, and then the locals are yelling at me harder than everybody else. It was a pretty tough day, that one. You wouldn't believe it. They beat the TFL number 2 side, the WTFA.
Really?
Yeah, no, they intimidated us off the oval, I think. That's pretty much what it was all about.
Now, your dad also used to write the footy roundup, didn't he, in the Advocate? So the West Coast footy roundup every week?
He did. I can remember, I used to proofread them for him, especially when I got to high school. I was really interested in what he wrote, and so he had this little notebook, just a very small notebook, and he'd probably write about 7 or 8 pages, and he'd submit that to the Advocate to go in to the paper, and I'd have a read of it in its handwritten form back in the days before computers and all sorts of things. And again, funnily enough, he wrote very well from memory, and I learned a lot about football just reading what he wrote, and look forward to that every week. He was quite a legend around there. His nickname was Doos. Don't ask me what that means. I've got no idea. D-O-O-Z. And I got called Little Doos. Fortunately, when I left Queenstown, that disappeared.
That didn't go with you. Yeah.
But, that was his nickname. I think even in the Advocate, it wasn't Austin, it was Doos Fagan. Pretty weird. But no, that was great that Dad could do that. And sort of in a funny sort of a way, it sort of made me interested in learning and being educated, because I thought he wrote so well. And one of the things he always encouraged in us kids was to go as far as we could in our education, because I think that was one of his frustrations in life, that he actually wasn't able to pursue. He wanted to be a phys ed teacher, but with things that happened in his family, he had to, and he was the eldest, he had to stay and work and raise the money to keep the family going. And as a result, he missed those opportunities. He was pretty determined that we wouldn't miss those opportunities ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. So he obviously had a great work ethic, which really comes into focus when the entire family moves from the West Coast to Hobart, so you can further your education. You're the oldest of 3 siblings, so there's or an additional 3 to yourself. There's David, Grant and Anne-Marie, is that right?
Yeah, yep. You've done your research well.
And they moved, the family moved, so you can go to college essentially.
Pretty much. You couldn't do year 11 and 12 on matriculation, as it was called back in those days. You had to move away from Queenstown, so that either meant going up to the Northwest Coast or going to Hobart. So I thought I was definitely going to go. I was encouraged by teachers I had at Murray High School that perhaps I had the capacity to pursue tertiary education. So ended up deciding I wanted to be a teacher myself, because I love what a lot of my teachers did for me. And so to do that, I had to go to Hobart. So I was going to go come hell or high water. I thought I'd be boarding. Mum and Dad didn't want to split up the family. They wanted to keep us together. And, when I look back at that decision, I think it was way easier for me to make the transition into Hobart and to studying, first of all, year 11 and 12 and then university, because they were there. I had my kids that leave home and do that themselves at a pretty young age. I was only 15, so it just made life so much easier. And, again, Dad, Mum had to sacrifice. Queenstown's an incredibly cheap place to live. Hobart was a lot more expensive, so to buy a house was a big effort by him. And I think Dad was doing about 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, and Mum was working full-time as a nurse. So I look back on that and think how I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for the sacrifices that they made, I don't think. So,
yeah. What sort of jobs did your dad do? So Beth was a nurse and
Mum was a nurse and Dad was an electrician. So he worked at the Zinc Works in Hobart as an electrician. But then he would do some bar work at night, and he also, for a period of time there, he was the hair driver at the Greyhounds on the TCA ground. So actually, when I became a uni student, one of my ways of earning money was because I played footy for Hobart Footy Club, and they were located up there. I used to work in their bar at the Greyhounds on a Thursday night to make a bit of money as well. So Dad and I were doing well out of the Greyhound Association. And we used to get some good tips as well. So occasionally we'd win a few dollars, which was handy as well.
Very nice. And then in terms of your football, when did that start to flourish? So your first Tasmanian TFL club was Hobart?
Yeah, so played on the West Coast, moved down. Went to Hobart because Dad actually had a couple of years playing with Hobart when he was a younger bloke, but that had to move back to Queenstown for the family reasons that I talked about. So I sort of went to Hobart just because he played there himself. I had a year in the under-19s as a 15-year-old. I'd been used to playing against the men on the West Coast, so that I was only a little bloke, but I was sort of used to big bodies around me, so that helped me a bit. Played under-19s and then had a year at that. And then I remember Mal Pascoe was coaching Hobart at the time, and I was doing pre-season with the seniors the next year, and so were a few other boys from the under-19s. And one night of training, he called everybody in, and he said, he gave 5 names, and they were under-19 boys that he wanted to stay, and the rest of them were going to go back and play in the under-19s. And I wasn't one of the ones that got called out. And then he said, "Is anyone else here think they're good enough?" So, for some reason or other, I put my hand up. I was pretty annoyed that he didn't call my name out just because I was small. So he said, "All right, if you're prepared to do that, you can stay here as well." So I made my senior debut that year. I think I played about 4 or 5 reserves games and, played a game against North Hobart. Was my first game. I remember playing in the forward pocket, and Mick Mansell, who's big name in Aboriginal rights in Tasmania, was my opponent. He was a pretty good fella to play on. He chatted to me all day. I think my first kick was a goal. My senior career started at the ripe old age of 16.
Wow.
Dad wasn't too impressed with me when I put my hand up, by the way. He thought I wasn't ready to play senior footy yet. I needed to grow a little bit more and get a bit stronger. But anyway, that's what happened. I got there and sort of kept playing senior footy for the next 14 or 15 years in Tassie. So
you go from Hobart, where you win a premiership in 1980.
Yeah.
And then Sandy Bay was your second club. Is that right? Yeah.
So Paul Sproul ended up being my coach at Hobart when we won the premiership, ex-Richmond player, Tassie guy. I loved him. I learnt more about football from Paul Sproul than probably any other coach that I had, and he took a really great interest in me for some reason or other, and we still catch up occasionally and have good chats when I'm back in Hobart. He's a hard taskmaster, but a great teacher of the game, and if he thought you were prepared to put in the effort, he'd give you his time. So I was lucky enough to have him as a coach at Hobart. We won a premiership. I think the year after the premiership, I had my sort of breakthrough year. I think I was about a 20-year-old by then. I won our club best and fairest and was runner-up in the William Leach medal that year. We didn't win the premiership, but it sort of got me going. And then he finished, and I stayed another year at Hobart. Then he popped up again at Sandy Bay as the coach, and he sort of had a chat to me, and I thought, I want to go down there and play under Sprowley again. So I ended up at Sandy Bay with him for a few years and had great times there. We didn't win a premiership. We got to a grand final, which was a bit of a bloodbath in 1986.
Glenorchy.
It was.
Yes.
Yeah, the fight, the band was marching off the ground at North Hobart Oval, having just played the national anthem, and the fight had broken out before the band had got out off the ground.
Well, I think this is 1988 when you're at Devonport when that happened, which I was going to ask you about.
No, I'm getting my grand finals.
Yeah,
you're 100%
86.
Right.
So Ambrose McDonald, I think the Glenorchy players had riled him up quite a lot before the game.
Yeah.
Andy Bennett was the coach at the time.
He was the coach of Sandy Bay. We had a really good team. Us and Glenorchy had a great rivalry that year, and we were probably favourites going into that grand final, and unfortunately, they were the better team on the day. Poor Ambrose's brother had gotten himself into a fair bit of trouble that particular week, and Ambrose had been in prison himself before he came to play with Sandy Bay, so it's pretty emotional, I imagine. So he was sort of on a razor's edge, and the grand final probably brought out that emotion, and it probably didn't help us in hindsight, but the Pies were too good that day. Yeah, it was a great grand final, but they deserved to win, and luckily enough, got another chance against them
Couple
in
of years
1988,
later.
playing for Devonport. I'd been transferred up there in my teaching job, and so I wasn't ever expecting to be playing with Devonport, but got moved up and played in a premiership side that year, and Glenorchy was the opponent again. Yes, I got my grand finals mixed up. Yes, the fights had broken out before the band had marched off the ground.
So the story is it's Glenorchy versus Devonport.
Yeah.
The two North West Coast teams came into the statewide league as it had become in 86 with just the northern teams and the southern teams. And the North West teams came in 87 and Devonport makes the grand final in 88 under Roland Crosby.
Yeah.
The band is playing before the grand final. The players are in their positions and the bandmaster's just a little tardy getting that band off and things tee off. What do you remember?
I can remember Roland Crosby saying to us before the game, because we were physically a pretty big side and we're old and quite mature. Glenorchy had a lot of really good young players. Adrian Fletcher, for instance, played in that game. Matthew McQueen, guys that got drafted to the AFL. And I remember Cros saying to us before the game, listen, if they want to start anything up, just give it to them. That's how footy was back in those days. You know? It was a pretty simple game. And we had a talented team as well and a very experienced team. And Glenorchy did actually try to start the fight, and then it was on. And it was like just the fuse was lit sort of before the first bounce, and so it happened. The funny part about that was that the next year, I think the TFL decided not to have the band. They just played the national anthem on the PA system, so the band didn't have to march off. There was no time for that. But
it is one of the wildest footy brawls I've seen, to be fair. And I had a look at it prior to having a chat to you again. I was actually trying to see how heavily involved you were, Chris. But you were number 12, is that right?
That's
at
right.
Devonport? Yeah. There is a shot of you in the bottom left-hand corner now. In fairness to you, you're pulling someone out of the fight. So I'm not sure how heavily you were involved prior to that. But your mum did famously say this a few years ago. She says, I think his aggression one day came out against Devonport when they won the premiership, and he gave someone a coat hanger. And they said that was the change that won them the game. And they got a surprise that he would do something like that, but I don't think it was intentional. He just had his arm out. So Beth was happy to excuse it was accidental.
No, well, I actually remember that incident. I was getting tagged in that grand final, and we were about 20 minutes in, and I don't think I'd touched the ball, and I'm thinking, it's 20 minutes in, I haven't touched the ball. I'm an on-baller. I'm meant to be getting the ball. And this bloke that was playing on me, he was grabbing my shorts, kicking my legs from underneath me, doing everything he could to stop me from getting the ball. And in the end, I turned around and said, if you do that one more time, mate, I'm going to belt you. I gave him a warning. Anyway, at the stoppage, he went to bring his elbow back to get me as I was about to go for the ball. I sort of ducked under the elbow and hooked him up underneath the chin as I was running past. And then I'll turn around and he's lying flat on the ground, knocked out. And I thought, oh, God. Then the Glenorchy boys worked out who it was. And about 16 of them come charging at me, Robert Gronewegan and Gary Linton, and I'm thinking, I'm giving it the old, it wasn't me. And anyway, they knew it was me. So, they sort of warned me that my life wasn't going to be worth living for the rest of that day. I mean, there was a record number of reports. I remember having to come back down to the tribunal that night because they were all trying to belt me after that. A couple of them got me. So
you had to give evidence.
I had to give evidence. Fortunately, we won the grand final. Fortunately, I started to get a few kicks after that, sort of got me going, and it was an amazing day for Devonport. Just new into the statewide league. I didn't realise how big it was for the township itself. I can remember the long bus trip back from Hobart after the game, and lots of celebration and beers being drunk on the bus, as was the way back then. And we arrived at the Devonport club rooms, probably would have been about 11 o'clock at night by the time we got back, because it's a good 3.5, 4 hour drive, and with a number of toilet stops on the way back that were required. The trip probably took about 7 hours, to be honest. So there were a lot of drunk people on that bus that night. So we got back to Devonport thinking that there would be nobody there, and there were like thousands of people at the Devonport Footy Club to welcome the team back, and the celebration just went on and on all night. I remember walking home at about 10 o'clock the next day for a shower and a change of clothes, then straight back down to the change room. So it was a great grand final. It was messy. It was ugly. It was probably of all the games of footy I played in, I reckon that was the one day where you just thought you were sort of a bit frightened because you didn't know where it was coming from.
Yep.
And I think everybody that was out there felt the same way. It did settle down as the day went on, but the first quarter and a half was just full on physical and ugly. And, you know, there should have been that many reports because it was that sort of game. It was before the days when we stopped. We didn't worry about concussion and, you know, belting people in the head and all those things. That was just the norm back in the 80s. I'm glad it's not anymore, but that's the sort of environment that we played in. And often in grand finals, it was like, there are no rules today, boys. That was sort of how they were played.
Just open slather. Yeah, I do have vivid imagery of little Kyle Wilson, who's probably only weighed about 60 kilos, but he was out there like he was Jeff Fennick or something.
Yeah, Kyle caused a lot of problems for his teammates because he was a great teammate, but he was a funny lad. You're right, he was 60 kilos wringing wet, and he just loved to mouth off and start a fight, and then he'd run off and leave all his teammates to sort it out for him. He might have been at the centre of a few of those things.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yeah.
So that was your footy career in Tassie. When does the idea of coaching at a senior level really materialise, as much as perhaps that the foundations of it were quite young on the West Coast through your father? Yeah,
I think the teaching background probably made me interested in coaching too. I love the game and I like that idea of trying to get the best out of people and make them work together. So I was always at the primary schools I taught at. I was coaching the local footy teams. I'd coach rep teams. So I almost started coaching when I was about 21, to be truthful. It's a funny sort of apprenticeship, I know, but still coaching. And so I did that for a number of years. And then when I was playing at Sandy Bay, then at Devonport, I ran the junior development squads at those clubs, so the under 14, under 16 groups. Matty Richardson was probably my most famous graduate from the Devonport under 16s. He was part of that squad. So I was sort of getting into the coaching even when I was playing, and then I think I went to North Hobart. I got transferred. I got a job at a private school in Hobart after a couple of years at Devonport, and moved back and played a couple of years with North Hobart. And I was sort of running the development squads there as well. And then Mark Yates came to North Hobart as a playing coach, and I retired the season prior to him coming. And I knew Yoda from my Devonport days. He was one of the guys we got over to spend a weekend with our young players. And so when he came to Hobart, he rang me and said, "Oh, wouldn't mind just staying on as the bench coach, and if you wouldn't mind, could you be the fitness coach as well?" So I had 2 years with Yoda, being the bench coach, being the fitness coach, and it was sort of like I was almost the coach without being the coach. He had the responsibility, but on game day I made the decisions and planned the training. It was great. Didn't have to answer to anyone really.
It's literally the year after the famous 89 grand final that he's at North Hobart. Is that right?
No. So I played a year with North Hobart in 1990, and Yoda came in 1991.
Okay.
So that was the year that I'd retired. So we went back to back. We won 2 flags in a row at North Hobart with Mark as coach. And I just had 2 years of invaluable coaching experience, and it was good doing the fitness stuff too, because you just, you learn how to condition players. And I had a phys ed background anyway, so understood a fair bit of that. So the two things worked quite well for me. And then Yoda left, and North Hobart were pretty keen for me to coach when he left. And then one of the guys on the board ran a bit of interference on me, just basically said, "Oh, well, we'll give you the coaching job if you make this bloke the captain." And I said, "That's not a good way to start." I'll tell you what I'll do. I won't coach North Hobart. I'll go and coach my old team, Sandy Bay, who haven't won a game for 2 years. Not a very good decision, really. But
you got them to, didn't they win their last final under you, Sandy Bay?
I had 2 years coaching the Sandy Bay. Why did I take that job? Well, it was my old club. I was a little bit annoyed with North Hobart, and I just remember reading somewhere at that time some quote where it said you don't learn to coach until you until you coach a team who doesn't know how to win and you teach them how to. And I thought, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. So I decided to do that. They hadn't won a game for a couple of years, and I thought oh, well, they can only go one way, and there'll be less pressure there for a new coach to sort of find his way. So I went there, and I think in my first year we might have won 5 or 6 games, but we were much more competitive. We had a young team, but you could tell that they were progressing. And then the next year we were able to recruit a few guys in. You realise when you become a TFL coach, you're the welfare officer and the employment officer and everything. So you get all these wonderful skills. And I was able to find a few guys jobs, like a fellow we recruited from Geelong, Marcus Wolak. He was he graduated from college as a teacher, and I got him a job at Dominic College where I was teaching. So we pulled together this team. We didn't have much money, but we gave guys career starts as sort of an alternative to being well paid. And we were on top of the ladder for most of that second year. We unfortunately lost the prelim final to New Norfolk, I think it was. But we'd made a lot of progress as a footy club, and again, that was an enjoyable experience. But probably at the time I was starting to think, God, I wish I could work full-time in footy, and that was sort of on my mind. I'd been teaching for 12 years, playing and coaching, and I just thought I'd put the two things together, teaching and coaching, how good, the same thing really, the love of the game and the teaching background. Is there a way I can get a full-time job in footy? And as it turned out, Gary Davidson, who you may or may not know, passed away, I think, a year or two ago. He was a great influence on me. He was heading up the footy foundation down there, and him and I were talking one day about, wouldn't it be good if we could get a team in the TAC Cup, and lo and behold, 6 months later we had a team in the TAC Cup. Davo got cracking on that, and so that there was a coaching position there, which was to coach the Tassie Mariners and to also be the state director of coaching. So that sounded like a pretty good job to me. So I went for it, went through the interview process and was able to get that position. So finally I'm working full-time in footy, doing what I love, trying to find all the good kids around the state to play for the Tassie Mariners and hopefully get drafted. So did that for 3 years. We were pretty awful in our first year. Just weren't up to the standard. But by the second year, we'd learned a lot in our first year, and we played. Well, I think we were one kick away from making it to a prelim final. I think we had 8 or 10 players drafted that year, and it was really quite a successful era. Those next 2 or 3 years, I think 14 players got drafted to AFL lists or rookie lists in that period of time.
Who were some of your success stories from that period?
Probably Russell Robertson was probably the biggest name, or the guy that achieved the most. Brody Rawlings as well.
Brodie Holland, was he there?
Brodie Holland was in that group. He played as a bottom age player. A few other boys that Gerard Bennett, who played a bit at Geelong, bit at the Sydney Swans. He had a bit of bad luck with injury. Daniel McAllister, who went to Essendon, Mark Harwood, who went to Port Adelaide. I think we had 4 or 5 boys in the top 20 of the draft.
Wow.
That year. So that was exciting to see young Tasmanian boys go and live their dream.
That's the educator, isn't it? The reward for
a bit
for your effort.
Yeah, and a lot of time driving around in cars finding kids. Like Daniel McAllister. I remember. I'm pretty bad at remembering names, but there was a really good guy up in Smithton who I knew. Michael was his first name. I can't remember his surname. That's terrible. But he rang me and said, "We've got this really good player up here in Smithton. His name's Daniel McAllister." He said he's a rugby player, but he's a pretty good footballer. And he was a Kiwi. His dad was a Kiwi, and he played rugby, but he played footy in the winter as well. And Michael said, "You should come up and have a look at him." So I'm thinking, geez, 5-hour drive up there. It's a long drive. He better be good, this kid. Michael Johnson was the guy's name. I just remember it. Should be able to remember that simple name. So I drove up, and there was Daniel. Had a kick with him. And I'm thinking, God, this bloke can move. He was a beautiful mover. He had really good hands. I'm thinking it was worth the drive. And so we put Daniel into our squad. It was a bit tough for him to play from Smithton, a long way away from even training centres on the northwest coast. So we relocated Daniel to Hobart. He lived with mum and dad. Dad was our property steward at that stage. He'd retired from work, and he was our property steward. So he had a bit of flesh and blood in the Mariners as well. So yeah, Daniel lived with mum and dad, had a really great year and got drafted to Essendon.
Brilliant.
Sheeds loved the story of, drafting the Kiwi, I think. But,
for sure.
I think he might have ended up playing 40 or 50 games. He didn't get to any great heights, but it's a good story, I reckon, of just that opportunity and getting those kids from those regions. I remember Mark Harwood he wasn't in any of the systems down there. He was a kid that was playing footy at Tribunna, and everyone told me he was a good player, and he was a carpenter, I reckon. And so I found out he was working on a building site in Hobart. So I thought I'll go and find him. So I went and found him on the building site. I asked him, "You Mark Harwood?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "They tell me you're a pretty good footballer." He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm all right, I suppose." I said, "How about coming and trying out with the Mariners?" "Oh, you reckon?" I said, "Yeah, no, I reckon you'd be good, mate." So he came down, tried out, got drafted by Port Adelaide. So there were kids that were coming through our systems, but we're finding other ones under rocks in various places around the state, which was really rewarding and exciting when you actually see that and they go on and achieve their dreams. It's great. So I had 3 years doing that. I loved every minute of it. It was probably my favourite job I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah, it was. It was hard work and it was long hours, but it was very rewarding. But I sort of noticed that AFL clubs were starting to appoint development coaches, and I don't know, I just sent my resume around to a few AFL clubs on a bit of a
few being nearly everyone, is that right?
Yeah, I had to go to all of them. Well, you just got to go fishing
Absolutely.
sometimes. And so I did, and I didn't really expect anything to happen. But the good thing about the TAC Cup was I'd gotten to know a lot of the recruiters from the AFL clubs over the course of that 3 years because they wanted to know a lot about your players. And so I started to get connected, I suppose, in AFL footy a little bit. And as it turned out, Neil Danaher had just been appointed coach of Melbourne. And for some reason or other, he liked my resume and they were looking for a reserves and a development coach at the time. And he rang me up and said, "Would you come over for an interview?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to come over for an interview." And seriously, I thought it was just going to be a good experience, that I wouldn't get the job, that there'd be others more credentialed than me to actually get that role. So I went over, did my interview. I was dismal in the interview, I thought. I just got so nervous. And I thought of all the good things to say when I walked out the door, when the nerves went away, that sort of thing. Anyway, for some reason or other, he must have liked me because I went back, said to Ursula, my wife, "Oh, don't worry, we won't be moving." And about 3 days later, I got a phone call from Neil saying, "Would you come over for a second interview?" And he said, "You better have a talk to your wife because there's a fair chance you're going to get this job, and you got to know that she wants to come." So I thought, "Oh, geez, I'm a chance here." So I said, "I had no problems coming over for the second interview." Had discussions with Ursula that night. So it was a big move for us moving to Melbourne. We had no family whatsoever there, 2 young daughters. So it wasn't straightforward.
Was Ursula working herself?
Yeah, she was a school teacher. So, I'm going to do this. But I'm thinking, I've just got one hurdle to overcome, And I remember just lying in bed having a chat about it. I said, look, I'm going to go. I reckon I'm going to go, and I'd really like it if you'd come with me.
Very persuasive face.
Yeah, so anyway, she wasn't that keen, I must admit. But when we got to Melbourne, she loved it. And she got a job teaching there and started to make friends, and our girls settled into school, and it all worked out really well for us. So I got, Neil Danaher gave me my start. I had 10 years at Melbourne with him, and I went from being the reserves and development coach to the forward line coach to the back line coach to the general manager of footy across the course of 10 years. Now, I thought when I first moved to Melbourne, I never sold my house in Hobart. I thought, I'll be back in 2 years. They'll get rid of me for sure. Because it's pretty hard to get into AFL if you hadn't played AFL.
Yeah.
So I was also like half shocked about it, And
so did you feel, you almost, what was going to validate you as someone who could bring something to the table? Was that hard for you, given you didn't have that experience as a player, and perhaps to a degree the fact that you'd come from Tassie?
A bit of that. I can remember the first training session at Melbourne. Neil introduced me to the playing group. They're looking at me going, "Who the hell is this bloke?" Right? So there's Gary Lyon and Todd Viney and Jim Steins and Stephen Tingay and all these big names, And So he introduces me, and then he goes, "You want to say a few words?" I'm thinking, not really. It's the last thing I want to do. But it was like, didn't have a choice. So I can remember just standing in front of them and going, "Look, you guys probably don't know me from a bar of soap. I love my coaching. I'm here to do as good a job as I can. Hopefully I can earn your respect over the next little while." And that's all I said, because I thought I can't say anything else. It was probably the right thing to say in hindsight. So I just went to work and just worked as hard as I could. And our reserves team was pretty successful across the 2 years that I coached them. We made finals both years. The senior team made the final in Neil's first year, and then we had a bad year in the second. But it's sort of, I built a great relationship with Neil, and he was a great supporter of mine and had a great belief in me for some reason or other.
How profound was Neil, his impact on you when you think about it?
Oh, I learned so much from him about how to analyse the game, I guess. I thought I knew how to analyse the game until I sat with him and watched the game and saw the notes that he would write and how he'd just sweat over the tape and find all these little things. And that was a great learning for me. I was able to teach him a few things too, and he was always open to any ideas that I threw up to him. But I think just over time we developed a really healthy respect for each other, and so much so when Danny Corcoran left Melbourne, I think to work for Athletics Australia, because he was the footy manager, and Neil came to him and said, I want you to be the footy manager. I said, I don't want to be the footy manager. No, the first thing about it, mate, like rules and regulations, that's not me, I'm a coach. No, mate, I want you to do it. It'll be good for you. Anyway, I ended up doing it. And it was good for me. I saw the other side of footy, I suppose. Coaching's pretty pure. When you work as a football manager, there's sort of that conduit between the football department, the administration and the board. And so I had to manage up for the first time in my life, it would be fair to say. And that was an interesting experience. Like I thought, I can remember going to the first few board meetings. I felt like I was going to the principal's office, to report. So I was pretty nervous in those situations. I gradually learned over time. And Karen Hayes, who I don't know whether she's still on the board at Melbourne, but she said to me, we want to help you. So don't come along being so nervous. Come along and tell us what's going on and ask us for our help. And that was a great bit of advice, and I took that from her, and think things got better after that. Especially I felt just more comfortable in that role. And it just taught me so many other elements to the game. And little did I know, like I was just getting this great football education all the way through. And my plan was never to be a senior coach like I am now. My plan was just to do as good a job as I could in the job that I had, and hopefully it would just keep me in the industry somehow. That was the view, just do as well as you can. So,
how many years after you left Hobart did you have the confidence to sell the house, that you knew you were safe to sell the house, that you weren't coming home?
Yes, I had the house, didn't sell it. I think it was about my third or fourth year in Melbourne. I thought, maybe I'm going to be all right here. So I did sell the house in Hobart and we bought a place in Melbourne. I probably missed an opportunity there, but anyway, it was just sort of how I felt. I was sort of unusual, I suppose, to be in the AFL system. My background wasn't quite the same, and I was just lucky that a guy like Neil could see that I had some attributes to coach that he liked, and he gave me an opportunity. So, it's when you think about it, without him, it was a great leap of faith, to be honest. He'd never met me before. We didn't know each other. All I did was an interview, and he gave me the job for some reason or other. And, here I am still in the industry somehow on the roller coaster ride. I thought I'd last two. I think this is my 26th year.
It's amazing.
So it's been a lot of fun, but so grateful to him. And when he left Melbourne, that was a sad day for me. Clarko had actually offered me a job at Hawthorn the year before Neil's last year, and I just politely declined because I just felt loyal to him. He gave him my chance. I knew he was in the last year of his contract. I was hoping it would all work out well, and we just continue working together at Melbourne. But as it turned out, we had lots of injuries that year. It was a tough year. And I think Neil could see the writing on the wall, so probably 2/3 of the way through, he called it quits. And I was thinking, gee, I should have taken that job at Hawthorn last year. But as it turned out, Clarko and Mark Evans never sort of filled that job at Hawthorn. They left it until they could find the right person. And so when Neil left, they rang me and said that job's still there as I was called head of coaching and development, which was fundamentally to help Clarko develop the coaches, but also run the development program for all the players. And I thought, and it was a new role in AFL footy. It was sort of a bit unheard of. And it sounded pretty exciting for me, right up my alleyway, I thought. And so I went to Hawthorn when Neil left Melbourne, and little did I know, in my 9 years at the Hawks, we're going to play in 5 grand finals and win 4 of them. So it was
amazing.
A pretty fantastic time.
When you reflect on that period for Hawthorn, is there anything that stands out in the fabric of that club that led to the success that you had?
Yeah, I think it was a coming together of a lot of things. I think we had really great staff in every area of the football department. We had great recruiters, Graham Wright, fellow Tasmanian, being one of those. We had a fantastic fitness group led by Andrew Russell. The coaching group worked well together. We challenged each other. I mean, Clarko's, when you're in a room with him, you don't not always having pleasant conversations. We pushed things hard and we had good arguments, but out of it all came some really good decisions and smart thinking. And he'd put together a really good group of coaches, and we were lucky enough to have this amazing playing group that just developed before our eyes and had great leaders. So by the time we won that 3 in a row, you got Hodge, you got Lewis, you got Roughhead, Gibson, Sam Mitchell, just genius footballers. So I just think it was that all the chemistry worked, and it took us a little while. We won in 2008, and then there was a 3 or 4 year period where we lost a few blokes, a few players. The team probably wasn't all that mature. Then I think they knew how much ability he had, and they got frustrated after we lost in 2012 to the Swans after probably being the best team all year. And that was like the moment that, righto, we've got to do something about this. We can't get beaten in a prelim, can't get beaten in a grand final. We've got to get in there again and go. And I think that was a catalyst for that 3 in a row, was those disappointments. And that fantastic playing group that really just, they owned it really. We just facilitated them in a sense as a coaching group. They were so smart and so talented, and we did come up with some good tactics in those finals and stuff. But it was I suppose it just taught me when if you want to be successful, you got to get so many things right on a number of levels. It's not just your team; it's the support staff, it's the administration, it's the board, it's how you think. And you've got to have that growth mindset all the time to get better. So a wonderful experience for me. Again, did a few different roles while I was at the Hawks. Head of coaching and development, which I loved. And then again, we lost Mark Evans to the AFL. I think James Fantasia, who was his replacement, got unwell. And Stuart Fox, the CEO, said to me, can you be the footy manager for the rest of the year? I think that was 2013. I said, if I have to. I already knew what that job was like. Pretty challenging job, but I thought, well, it's the middle of the season. We sort of hard to find somebody, so I said yes. And then at the end of the year, he said, could you stay and be the footy manager permanently? So I ended up back being a footy manager again and out of coaching, which is where I really really would have liked to have been. But it was, again, a fantastic experience to be in that role at Hawthorn during such a successful period. Clarko and I had a great partnership together.
Why did that work so well, do you reckon? I mean, you talk about the way you could challenge each other, and that's what really close people can do, people who have mutual respect.
Probably because we're poles apart in some ways as people. Well, we have a passion for football. He's more fiery and spontaneous than I am. I'm probably more measured and calm. So probably we met in the middle of on a lot of things, and that was often the right solution. So as I said, it was good and it was challenging, and I learnt again a lot from him. I suppose what I learned from from Clarko is the research and looking into other sports and what can you learn from them that you can bring to our game. Went overseas a lot with him, just opened my eyes, I think. So it was wonderful in that regard, and I think that's his standout trait was his willingness to learn and improve and grow, and understanding that if you want to be the best team for a while, you can't be the same team. You've got to keep evolving. So that was brilliant. So
he won't be wasting this year, will he? He's not that way inclined, and surely isn't lost to coaching either. But it seemed to catch so many off guard, including you, didn't it, when he left Hawthorn and under the circumstances as well?
Yeah, for me, I could understand probably why Hawthorn made the call. I think Hawks had only been in one final series for 5 years, which is very un-Hawthorn-like, and Clarko had been there for 17 years, and all of us have got a shelf life, I think. It was miraculous that he lasted for 17 years, because I reckon that shelf life somewhere between 5 and 10 years, personally. So you could sort of understand why they may be thinking that way. For me, though, I just thought the process was wrong. For someone who had been so good for them. I mean, Hawthorn were on their knees when he first started, and financially and on the field, and, you know, he turned it around to the point where they were a juggernaut there for a while. He couldn't stop them. And, you know, membership became 70 or 80,000, and they were one of the wealthiest clubs. So there was a huge transition, and not necessarily was it all Clarko's doing, but he played a large part in it. So for me, I felt like after that long that it could have been done in a more civilised way, where parties could have reached agreement without the appointment of a standing coach. And that's not a criticism of Sam Mitchell at all. It's just, for me, it's more like, well, there's a better way to do it, a better way to look after a bloke who's been historically one of the great coaches of all time, and probably Hawthorn's greatest coach, and that's with Alan Jeans and John Kennedy. You know, they're icons as well, but his record suggests that. And so, yeah, it was a sort of a shock. It wasn't in a way, but it was the way it happened that shocked me.
And with that, does it then, given the reaction from the fan base as well, does it actually make life harder for Sam Mitchell in a way that he has this immense amount of pressure on him as an untried senior coach in a way?
Yeah, he will have that pressure, but Sam's pretty good at dealing with pressure. That's one thing I learned about him in working with him at Hawthorn. He'll embrace that. He understands the situation that he's in, and I'm pretty sure that he'll cope with it well. He's got a pretty thick hide and a lot of self-belief, and he's very knowledgeable on the game. And I think, you know, in this period of time since he's played, he's learned a lot more about coaching and people management that'll stand him in good stead. So, you know, I'll wish him well, and you know, I hope he has success, except against the Lions, obviously. But you know, he was always going to be a coach. You could tell that. It would have been nicer if it could have been in better circumstances, probably.
And you've had so much football experience over many, many years. If you were to impart some advice to a young coach, like a Sam Mitchell, for example, what is it like? It seems to be such a high-pressure job these days, perhaps more than ever before. The industry can spit people out very quickly. Would you have any advice that you would offer a young coach?
Oh, there's probably lots, but I think young people have changed, and building relationships with them is a very important part of coaching now, and you've got to take time as the head coach to do that, and you've got to embrace the ideas of others. It can't just be all you generating what happens. You've got to get everybody else on board and coming up with ideas as well. I think once you get that sort of ownership and buy-in, then performance on field escalates. So I think that's very important. So you got to almost hang your ego on the hook and don't come in as the coach that thinks you know everything. You've got to come in knowing that you don't know everything. But your job is to, how can you set this place up so that all the good ideas possible can be generated and for the benefit of the team. I think that's a modern management, if you like. I think it's very important that you keep energy in the place. The players spend a lot of time there. The staff spend a lot of time there. There's ups and downs emotionally. So to keep the place level emotionally and to make sure that even though it's a full-time job, people have time to get a little bit of balance and re-energise is particularly important, particularly in the busy lives that we seem to lead now. I think you've got to make your club a safe place. The scrutiny on all sports people at the highest level, but particularly at AFL level, and particularly in this town of Melbourne, is unbelievable. And from that perspective, I think you've got to make sure your club is a safe place to come to, where players can learn, make mistakes, and get better, and not pay too much for those mistakes that they make or criticise them too much. Everything's got to be turned into a learning opportunity. I think they're the key things. I mean, I could probably list another 12 or so that I've learnt along the way, but that having a purpose, having relationships, having a safe environment, and having a growth mindset, I think, are all the key elements to building a successful club and getting great people around you, and knowing that you can't do it yourself. It's not possible. It's too big a job.
And this is obviously all knowledge you acquired over a very long period of time in the game. Do you feel there is almost a sweet spot for an AFL coach in terms of age, that you do need some bank of experience or a heavy bank of experience behind you before you're really ready for the modern demands of that role?
Yeah, look, I think good coaches can come from all different pathways. I'm really grateful for the background that I've had, but it sort of took me 20 years to become an AFL coach, and I've experienced a lot of things, and maybe me with my background, that's the only way it was ever going to happen. So, and it's probably a little bit unusual, but I think, the more things you've experienced, I think coaching your own team, for instance, is a really important thing to have done before you get to coach an AFL team. I think just being a line coach and coming through that way is challenging, because the line coaches do a terrific job, but fundamentally they look after a small group within the team of, say, 10 to 12 players. And it's vastly different from being the senior coach, where you've got the whole group to think of, you've got all the coaches to think of, you've got all the football department to think of, and you've got to manage up and down, and you've got to continually tell your story to the media in a positive sort of way. That's bloody challenging. And I'm so grateful that I had all those experiences along the way, and I think it's helped me a bit. Probably helped me to be myself. I think that's probably the other bit to it, is that sometimes when you get into those big roles like that, you think you've got to put an act on, and I'm guilty of that. But I've learned along the way the only person you can be is yourself, and so I think I'd encourage young coaches to coach as many different lines as they can, coach their own team if they can. Go to a board meeting and see what they're like if you can. Get as much media experience as you can, so that if your opportunity does come along, you're fairly well rounded. It would be my advice. But there's no exact pathway to it. And as I said, I didn't think I'd ever be an AFL coach. I never set out to be. I would have loved to have been one, but I didn't think that was going to be possible for me. And the Brisbane thing came late. Swanee rang me and said, "Are you a coach or a footy manager?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm a footy manager, but I'd love to be a coach." And he goes, "Oh, we're interested in you. We'd like to put you through our process." And I said, "Okay, I'll." Once I worked out they were fair income and not just, trying to get a list of people that looks all right and then picking the best one out of them, I went for the job. And when I got the job, and when I first started, I thought, what have I got myself into here? But it's been the best thing I've ever done in my life, really. To sort of get to a club that felt a bit broken.
Bit like Sandy Bay when you first got there, your first senior job.
Yeah, it was a little bit the same. It's sort of been my life a little bit. Melbourne was a bit broken when Neil and I started together. Hawks weren't, but Brisbane, had gone through some tough times. And there wasn't a lot of belief around the place, or that no one could really see the blue sky. And I couldn't see the blue sky for a while either, to be truthful, when we first started. But to watch the transition of the club, the people in it, the players, and see their self-esteem grow, and their belief grow. It's been a wonderful process, and we've still got work to do. We still think that we can get there. We still think that great things are possible. So we'll keep working hard towards that. But it's been, just such a rewarding thing to see, particularly for guys like Zorko and Rich, Harris Andrews, Darcy Gardner, the guys that were there before I got there, who saw a lot of hard times, and they probably didn't think that was ever going to change. And now they've been able to go through a process that I don't think will just help them with their footy, but will help them in their life when they leave footy. You can improve, you can get there if you keep working away and be prepared to make mistakes and learn from them. You can eventually become good, and I hope they've all felt like they've learnt something from the process.
The window is so open for you. Do you feel like it's really open for you at the moment? I mean, you keep getting to the right places on the ladder to really contend for a premiership.
I think there is a view out there that we've had 3 chances and we might be dropping out of our window, but I keep reminding people that we've got the 4th youngest list in the competition, and 2 years ago when we first made finals, it was the second youngest list in the competition. So I think that we've had invaluable experiences at a very young age that should stand us in good stead, and we've never seen them as failures. Yes, we've only got to 1 prelim, and yes, we finished top 4 3 years in a row, and a couple of years we've gone out in straight sets, but we're only by a point and 3 points, I might add, not by much. I think that young group's doing particularly well, and I think there would be regrets. We all have those. You wonder to yourself how many chances are you going to get, but that's not how we've looked at it. We've just sort of made that decision. I always believe with regrets you can ignore them. Not a very good idea, I don't think, to ignore your regrets. You can get all emotional about them, and that can drag you down. That's not a good idea. Or you can learn from your regrets, and that's what we've decided to do, and that's what we've been doing from day dot when we started together. We don't fear failure. We don't fear mistakes. We know they're just learning experiences, and I'm hopeful that all that hardening process that we've been through over the last 3 years will stand us in good stead. And I look at guys like Zach Bailey and Starcevich and Rayner and McCluggage and Berry, and there's probably some names I've missed out. They've now played between 50 and 100 AFL games.
You've got a good team, haven't you?
They're just about to go is how I feel about it. So if we can get some luck, you always need luck with injury. We can, and if we can keep our positive outlook on things, I think we've got all that we need to be successful at some point in time in the future.
Do you know how long you want to coach for? How long you'd like to be a senior coach for? You talked about there being a time period that Clarko probably exceeded somehow.
I suppose from my point of view, I don't want to outstay my welcome wherever I'm a coach. So I don't know when that welcome will disappear.
I don't think it's coming very quickly, Chris.
Yeah, but it can come quickly. I've seen it come quickly at times. I suppose for me, I just got to look at it every year and go, am I still making a difference? And if the answer to that is yes, and others are answering yes to that as well, then I'll probably keep going. If that's not the case, I don't want to be one of those coaches that outstays my welcome and then the club's forced to make a hard decision. I'd like to think I could see that coming. I've always said to the players and the leadership group, look, when you reckon I've lost it, come and tell me, boys. I'd rather you tell me than not tell me. I don't want to be the bloke the coach that you're laughing about behind his back because he's no longer got the goods. I've had that honest conversation with him, so I don't know when that'll be. I just keep trying to do my best and I want to always be able to put maximum energy into it. So if I ever got to that point where I thought, I just don't think I've got that in me anymore, I'd make the call on myself too, because it's a hard job. It never leaves you alone. You're always under the rock 12 months of the year, 7 days a week, every hour of the day. You're the coach.
Massive job, isn't it?
Yeah. There's plenty of people that help me. I haven't got it all on my own, and I'm glad I've got those people supporting me, but it's a tough job. It's not for everyone, I can assure you. It's not for the faint-hearted.
Absolutely. I can see it. I can see how consuming it would be, the demands of it and your responsibility to the players, to the fans, to the sponsors, to so many different...
Yeah, and you always feel like it rests on your shoulders, even though there's a whole lot of other people there. Ultimately, it sits on your shoulders because you're the one that goes to the press conference after the game every week and you've got to explain why you played well or you didn't play so well. Fortunately, that's got a little bit easier the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you the truth, my first and my second year, I used to go for a long walk the day before a game. And most of that long walk, I'd be trying to work out, what am I going to say to them tomorrow if we lose? Because I thought in my first 2 years, I thought there was more of a chance that we're going to lose than win because I was a realist about that. But I always wanted to paint a picture of improvement, not in a rubbish, made-up sort of a way. But the thing about it is you can always find it if you look for it. And that's what we tried to do. We just tried to look where we're improving. We were terrible at contested ball for 10 years. And so we started measuring contested ball and I'd show them the line graph. And even though we weren't winning games, we're starting to get better at contested ball so they could see that.
That's our victory.
Yeah, that sort of, so finding the little wins. And I just, as the head coach, had to keep telling the positive story that we were getting there and hopefully the boys would believe that and everybody else would buy it and leave me alone for a while we got good enough to play finals. So I was lucky enough in my third year that happened. I'm not sure that they would have kept believing if we had had another year where we didn't make finals or got somewhere close.
Well, believing's what this podcast is all about, and you talk about that worm, that trajectory, and for decades there's been this sort of flat line and maybe the little up occasionally, and now a very drastic climb in that worm in terms of Tasmania securing an AFL licence. I know your focus at the moment is Brisbane, and rightly so, but as an expat Tasmanian, how strongly do you feel about the state having its own team?
I've felt strongly about it for a long time, probably because I coached the Tassie Mariners and all those kids went on to play AFL footy, and I used to think to myself back then, why can't we just have our own team and build our own talent and get in there? All the Adelaide teams had come in and the Sydney teams had come in, and not both Sydney teams at that stage. It was just the Swans and the Crows and Port Adelaide had come in, and the expansion teams in the West. I'm thinking, why not Tassie? We're a footy state. It seemed logical to me, but obviously there was financial and political reasons why that never happened. We weren't seen as a growth area for the game, I guess, whereas Sydney was and Queensland was. So Gold Coast and the Giants pop up, not a Tassie team. So just from a historical point of view, I always felt that we deserved that opportunity, and I can remember I was fortunate enough to play in some games representing Tasmania, and it was the greatest thing you could do when you were a local player. If you can make the Tassie side and play against Queensland or New South Wales or the Big V occasionally, the ACT, it was so exciting. So I always thought, I wish young blokes in Tassie could have that opportunity to do that, representing their own state and thinking about the passion that people have for football in Tasmania. And to be truthful, every now and then I go back and I feel like that passion's gone a little bit in more recent times, but I think that can be reignited. It's a bit like, I see it a little bit like Richmond were 6 or 7 years ago, when they had some lean years and their membership had dropped, and then suddenly they started going well and started winning premierships, and suddenly they've
Richmond
gone
fans
from
are coming from everywhere.
30,000 supporters to 100,000 supporters. I'm thinking that's Tassie. And I know a lot of people down there support their own AFL teams, but I reckon they'd jump on board. They're parochial Tasmanians. We all love each other. You can always find the Tasmanian in the room, I reckon, whenever you're at a function. So, I can. That's what I can see. I can imagine that stadium full of people barracking for the green and gold or primrose or whatever colour they decide
magenta.
Whatever colour they decide to become. But I just think it'd be just wonderful for the state, wonderful for the state's economy. It's a high profile game, AFL footy, and if you've got a team, that's big. We've had great Shield cricket teams down there. We've got the Jack Jumpers back in the basketball. It just doesn't make any sense to me to not have a team down there. So I'm so pleased that it seems now that it's real serious and getting to the pointy end. And the last yards are often the hardest yards. But, I just encourage everybody in Tassie to get behind it. It'll bring so much business to the state. It'll highlight how beautiful Tasmania is. It'll get more tourists there. It'll lift the economy. And we've seen it in Adelaide. They built that beautiful stadium there and what that's done for the city. I think the plans are for the stadium to build on the domain there, on the Cenotaph sort of area, regatta grounds, and that's just that's the pathway to the city. And in Hobart, I can just imagine what that would be like on game night. The town would be buzzing.
You've got a real twinkle in your eye just talking about it, you see. But when you look at the imagery of that stadium, it's hard not to be swept up in it.
Absolutely. It'd be the best stadium in the country and perhaps anywhere in the world if and when it gets built. So I hope we get that licence so it does get built and that Tassie get that opportunity that they've long deserved. And when you think of the players that we've contributed to the game, I think it's a no-brainer for me. And I think deep down in everyone's heart, everyone knows that. And so I think the appetite's there, and I think the business case is strong. That's always been the sort of killer on it all, hasn't it?
Yeah, the sticking point.
Yeah, and I think that's been so well put together now. The AFL will be hard-pressed to ignore this one.
Chris, it's been fantastic chatting to you. You've been really generous with your time. Just in closing, a couple of quick Tasmanian-orientated questions for you. I've got 10 quick questions. So, first of all, who is the greatest footballer to come out of Tasmania, in your opinion?
Oh, look, Royce Hart was always he was a genius player, career cut short by knee injuries and, at his best, he was the best centre-half forward in the country, a very hard position to play in. So with, Peter Hudson, God, how can, Hutto, it's hard to separate those two in my mind. And Darryl Baldock's probably in that group as well. They were men that sort of changed the game in their era. And it was probably a little harder for those guys to come through from Tassie back then than what it is now with the systems that we have in place. So I'll sit on the fence and say all three of those guys, but wow, you think of that, how good were those guys?
Calibre of player.
Yeah.
What should the name of Tasmania's AFL team be?
I actually liked the Mariners back in the day when I coached the Tassie Mariners. I thought that was a brilliant name for an island state.
Yeah.
And it's a good, strong sporting name. I wouldn't be afraid to grab back hold of that. The Devils will get a run, I suppose. Jack Jumpers was an interesting one, wasn't it?
That was.
Basketball.
I actually really liked that.
But they are native to Tasmania.
And I didn't realise that no one else knew what they were. So as much as I loved it, I was always explaining to people what a Jack Jumper was.
People in Brisbane asked me the same thing. Well, why are they called the Tassie Jack Jumpers? I said, well, Jack Jumpers are like these ants.
If you ever come across one, you know what a Jack Jumper is.
Anyway, I wouldn't call them after an insect. That needs to be more powerful.
Yeah, they can be squashed.
So I quite like Mariners.
All right, now here's what colours would you recommend?
I would go personally with the traditional Tasmanian colours. I love that jumper with the map of Tassie in the middle of it. I mean,
such a powerful emblem, isn't it?
I mean, I know we're all called the Mappers. That was the nickname for us. But it was a powerful jumper. It's a picture of the map of Tasmania. I mean, why not?
The strength of that symbol is unbelievable. Yeah. All right, here's a curly one for you. Who should be the first coach? 2028, they're talking about Fags as being maybe the first season.
Yeah.
It's a bit of time to achieve what you want to achieve at Brisbane. A couple of premierships.
So how old will I be then? 67. I reckon I'm probably too old. Look, if I was out of coaching, I'd love to help Tassie out in some way, shape or form. Look, you've got to go and get the best coach that you can get. Obviously, Clarko's on the market at the moment. And if they find out they're going to get a licence pretty soon, I'd snap him up because imagine him having 4 or 5 years to put his team together.
Oh, my goodness.
So that would be exciting. That's who I'd target, I think.
Okay, let's do that. Who should be the inaugural president? Anyone spring to mind?
I think probably someone who's a prominent businessman in Tasmania should be that. A guy like Errol Stewart. Jackson Motor Company. He's probably got heaps of other things going down there. He probably has a pretty good whole of state perspective on things. I think I'd probably like to take that parochial thing out of it and have a bloke who's got tentacles everywhere, and I think he has. And there are probably some other men or women that fit into that category that I don't know the names of because I've been out of Tassie for a long time. But I think, someone local.
Who should they play in their first game? Packed stadium on the river at the regatta ground. Who should be the opponent?
I think the appropriate opponent probably would be Hawthorn, given that they've probably been the team that's been down there the longest. They've been down there longer than North, haven't they?
Yeah, 2001 was the first game.
So I think, I'd probably go for Hawthorn in that game.
Okay. Old or new in terms of a theme song for the team? Would you go something traditional or something new, more modern?
I think you've got to attract the young people to the team. So I'd go for something modern, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
And if Tasmania was to get free rein on any player in the competition, who would be the number one player Tasmania should pick up?
That I would take outside of, I won't mention any Brisbane players because then I would get accused
Who would you at least hate to lose? Yeah.
But the bloke I would take would be Dustin Martin. I just think he's such a wonderful footballer. When he's at his peak, it's hard to stop. So a couple of those Melbourne blokes are looming up though. Petrarca and Oliver are becoming great footballers. So there'd be someone like that.
Any of those blokes would be just fine. Where would you recommend someone goes when they visit Tasmania? Where is a not-to-be-missed location to visit?
I think Fraser, National Park.
Magic.
Just beautiful there. So I think that. And I think for atmosphere, Salamanca Place in Hobart is pretty cool. I spend a lot of time down there when I go back having coffees catching up with people. So, and it's not going to be far from the new stadium. So
absolutely.
Good spot.
Siren sounded. Tasmania trails by 5 points. Anyone, any former Tasmanian or current Tasmanian player can have a shot for goal after the siren to win the game. Who are you giving that distinction to?
I'm having this I know who I wouldn't have.
Who wouldn't you have?
Richo. Yeah. He'll hate me for that.
He'll probably answer himself.
Yeah, he'll hate me for that. Tasmanian to have a shot at goal, currently playing or whoever.
Or
previously. Peter Hudson.
Nice flat punt through from 35 out.
Through, just give everyone a bit of a nervous twitch as it sort of wobbles through the air, but they always seem to go straight.
Chris Fagan, are you a believer?
Absolutely, I am, and I'm hoping it's going to happen sooner rather than later. I just think it'd be so good for our state.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure, mate.